Hey everyone, Mike here in the BFH garage. I have a TJ up on the rack, has a rear Dana 35 axle, and it's making a grinding noise. Let's go see if we can figure out what's going on. Okay, to save a little bit of time, I already have the wheels off. I have the differential drained, so understand you have to do that. Pop that out, get that all drained out. I did find some metal flakes inside the differential oil as it was down on the pan. Not a whole lot, but enough to give me concern. So first thing I'm gonna do is sit here and take a look at the ring gear and the spider gears and see what kind of shape everything's in. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hold on to the ring gear and I'm gonna check the backlash on that. So the backlash feels good on that. I'm gonna inspect the ring gear teeth here for any damage. Those look pretty good. However, I do see some other damage here. So let me get this camera in closer and I'll show you what I'm talking about. All right, so as we look closer at the ring gear actually looks pretty good. So I want to do an inspection on the spider gears. And as you look at the spider gears, I'm going to start rotating them here. Let me get out to an axle shaft. I'm going to start rotating them. They actually look pretty good with the exception of right there. You're going to see that one small pitting in the spiders there, but that's not really enough to truly concern me just yet. But they feel like they're rotating really smoothly, so I don't have a concern there at all. Where my concern lies is as I rotate the ring gear in the carrier here, you're going to notice on this other side, in fact, you see a little bit of right here, you see how it's kind of shiny right there, but it's really noticeable on the other side. So let's take a look at what I'm talking about. You see how you have the dark part of the carrier here. Well, this used to be the same way. This got rubbed off, and my guess is the pinion head back there, the bearings are loose or worn, and it's coming out and it's rubbing up against this. And that's what's causing all the noise of grinding and stuff, and it's hitting that and peeling that stuff off. So my guess is we just need new bearings. I'm not 100% certain yet, so I'm gonna pull everything apart, take a look at it closely. I'm gonna take a look at the carrier bearings and the pinion bearings a little bit more closely and go from there. So the first thing we need to do is get this retaining screw out. Sometimes it's actually a roll pin, but in this case here, it's a 12-point quarter-inch retaining screw. So a word of caution here, these things are prone to breaking the head off and leaving the thread still on the inside. If that's the case, you may have to take a drift punch and punch it. It's a pain in the rear, but in this case here, this is what that pin looks like to give you a little bit closer look to it. So now that we have the pin out of the way, what we need to do is line up our cross pin and start pushing out. You see how it wants to just fall out naturally? So you gotta push it back up a little bit. I'm gonna let that slide out, set it down here, and then I'm gonna come over to my axle shaft. Actually, let me line this up so you can see this a little bit better. I'm gonna come over to the axle shaft, I'm gonna push it in. You see how that just came in? Now you can take a magnet, you gotta turn the C-clip to get it right there. You can take a magnet, the C-clip comes right out. And that's what those look like. So with the C-clips out of there now, take your axle shaft, you'll slide it out, you'll hear it drop. That means it's outside of the carrier. Now you need to be careful because your spider gears can come walking out. So you can use this video as well if you want to learn how to replace your spider gears because you have to do all the same stuff. And now what you got to do is rotate spiders this way. Make sure that you get the thrust washer with it. The other one fell out the back already, so I'm going to just rotate it down. So I have to find another thrust washer. Then you get your side gears, and they also have a thrust washer right there. And I'm going to keep those side specific just because of wear patterns. And that's it, your spiders are out. So now that we have that apart, all we have to do is take out the 4 5/8 bolts there, and the carrier should drop right out. So now that I have the carrier bearing caps off, we need to pull the carrier out. Now, one thing I want to make sure you understand is on carrier bearing caps, they need to be noted on which side they're at and what their orientation is, up or down. If there's no markings on yours, then you need to take a punch and, whatever you want to do. One punch on this side, two punches on this side, whatever, and then make sure you recognize which one's top or bottom, because it does make a difference. It only goes in there one way. They're machined with the housing, so it's really important. So as you go to pull the carrier out, make sure you count for any master shims. Like I have one on this side that's coming out, so I'm going to grab that. And I'm going to grab this side. I'm going to pull this out, and normally under good preload, that wouldn't come out that easy. So that's been running in there for a while. And let's get in there and take a look. Now I'm going to get some brake clean, get it all cleaned up, and we'll take a closer look. So after getting everything all cleaned up, I took a look at the bearings, and the bearings actually look pretty good. There's no pitting. It's got normal wear patterns, so I'm not concerned about those bearings. Looking at the pinion head, however, you can see how there's little wear marks on there where it looks like it was going up against that carrier, possibly removing some of that metal off of the carrier. And you get a good look at it here. You can see the differentiation in color there. So I'm still thinking and leaning now towards the pinion bearings being bad. The thing the tough part about this is that the Dana 35 pinion bearing, you got to use a crush sleeve to reset that pinion. And this one feels tight, but I can't test it under load, so I can't tell whether it's moving in or out. It doesn't feel like it, but the only way I'm going to be able to find out if the bearings have any problems or not is to actually remove it and visually inspect that. So it's one of those things I have to do. So I'm going to get the pinion out and we're going to take a look. As you can see, I got everything out of the axle housing. I went ahead and pulled the pinion out, had a look at those bearings because I wasn't seeing anything that was indicative of a total axle failure. So as I dive deeper into this, I get everything out, it all looks good. So after inspecting all the parts, everything looks good. Spider gears are in good shapes. The thing that doesn't look good, however, are the bearings. So I went through the bearings, and they're not pitted or anything. Let me get you a close-up here. When you're looking at the bearings, they're not pitted. They actually don't look bad. However, they're definitely worn. And what I mean by that is I got a new bearing pack over here. And when I measured, I got my calipers out and I measured bearing to bearing, and the used bearings are definitely worn by thousandths of an inch. So that is the reason this pinion was able to sneak out and start making contact right here on the carrier, was because of normal wear and tear. I'm not sure how many miles it has on this, but it was enough that it allowed the pinion to walk out a little bit and get on that carrier. So this job here is going to be as simple as pressing on new bearings, confirming the Backlash is in spec and everything else is good, and it'll be back. You have to take and get your races pressed in. I just did that one. Just find the right size seal driver set and we'll get them pressed in. It's time to put in the pinion seal. Make sure you clean up all of the old seal that's in there so that way your new one slides in nice and easy and gets a good seal. One of the other things I do, I put in my bearing, but before I do it, I load it up with some gear oil. That way it's not running dry the first time that we're getting that going. So you want to make sure that you put in your bearing, and if your pinion has a baffle that came on the backside, you want to add that in there. This one did not. And from that point, we will install the seal. Now, as you place the seal up here, get it going straight, then you're going to find the appropriate size driver, put it around the outside, and you're going to tap it straight in until this flange meets the outside of the pinion nose there. All right, now we want to get the pinion through, but before you put the pinion through, you want to make sure you take your crush sleeve. This crush sleeve fits right over the pinion like so. And what happens, it's also known as a collapsible spacer, and what happens is that as you tighten the pinion nut, this collapsible spacer collapses just like it says. This is the old one, this is the new one. I'm not sure if you can see the difference there. It doesn't collapse it by much, but it is enough, and we're talking thousandths of an inch, it is enough to maintain the pinion preload that is needed. So make sure you get the collapsible spacer on there. We're going to get the pinion through. Now that bearing's loose in there, and until we get this yoke on there, it's kind of free floating. So I'm going to slowly get my yoke to go through there first. There we go. And now I'm on, and I can take for example, a dead blow to get this started, but you don't want to damage your pinion seal, so you got to be careful. So all I did there was I got the yoke started, so now I can get the nut on there and start driving the nut on. Once I start driving that nut on, it's going to start increasing in preload, which is what it takes to make this yoke turn, the entire pinion turn. Right now it's 0. As you start collapsing that spacer, that preload starts to grow, and it doesn't take much to get it fine-tuned, but it sometimes can take a lot to get it started. So sometimes it takes a cheater bar. More likely it's going to take a cheater bar to get that collapsible spacer to start crushing. So what I like to do to tighten up all that slack initially is I put on the original pinion nut, I take my impact and I drive it until I don't have this in and out play anymore. That in and out play, you want to get out of the way first. Now that I have the new pinion nut on, you want to make sure that as you starting to tighten this by hand now, I have this only on tight enough, if you'll notice there's still a little bit of in and out play. And that's so I'm not over crushing that sleeve. I'm going to do everything else by hand instead of with the impact, because the impact can make it go too far too fast. Now you got to understand, when you start to tighten this, you want to do it in little bitty increments. I'm going to put a pipe wrench here and I'm going to turn this, and it's going to move maybe that much, or at least till I get the play out, and then I'm going to continually check my resistance. On new bearings, according to the factory service manual, you want between 20 and 35 inch-pounds. Every setup I do, I'm looking between 16 and 20 inch-pounds. That's just what works for me. You talk to a lot of other expert gear setters, that is a very common thread, is to go to that 16 to 20 inch-pounds. So that's what I'm shooting for. Let's see what we got. So with the pinion in there the way it needs to be, we got a good pinion preload. Now I'm going to reinstall the carrier with the new bearings, and I'm going to put the original shims back in place, and everything should be good. So you remember how easy this thing fell out when I pulled it out. Now it's pretty tight, and that's because it's got the new bearings in there. The old ones wore down so much they started squishing in. Now we're back to good solid bearings. That sounds like a good backlash. Let's take a look. Now let's take our dial indicator and put it up here and check backlash. I have another video on how to use these specialty tools, so if you're not familiar, you can reference that video. I'm going to put it there. You want to make sure you take your reading on the drive side being the more flat side. Your coast side goes up at an angle. Make sure there's a gap between that next lower tooth, and then we are going to go back and forth. You can zero it out if you want, or you can just do the math in your head. Right there, we are right at 0.08 of an inch. So putting in new bearings took us back to the factory specs of what this should have been to begin with. So now I can torque the bearing cap bolts down. And on this case, in a 2003 TJ, they're 57 foot-pounds. So I have that in place. Just out of curiosity, I'm gonna run a pattern just to see what it looks like. There's not much I'd be able to change with it anyway. It's, you know, they're used gears, and it's pretty much gonna be what it's gonna be. It's a Dana 35, which, as you guys know, that I don't particularly care for them. They're a notoriously weak axle. However, this one not being used off-road, it's fine for daily driving around the city. So let's run a pattern real quick, see where we're at, and then we're back to putting in the spider gears. All right, we spun it through a couple times. Let's take a look. For being used gears, that pattern is exactly where I'd expect it to be. So I'm perfectly comfortable putting the spiders back in and sending this thing down the road. Putting the spider gears back in, take your thrust washers, put them back on your side gears first. You're going to get it installed on each side. You're going to take your axle shaft, line it up, slide it through, take your C-clip, put your C-clip back in the slot, and then you're going to pull the axle shaft back out. That holds the axle shafts in place now. So everything's set there. Now we need to take the spiders. I'm going to take one here, set it. I'm going to rotate it all the way around to the other side. I'm going to take my hand and hold it in place. And my goal here is to look straight through and make sure I line up the teeth to where that hole lines up, because if you're off even a half a tooth, that cross pin is not going to go in. That looks good there. I'm going to put my thrust washer on, start rotating it back. Then I'm going to take my pinion and start to rotate this to where I get the cross pin through. I'm going to start it, and I know there's a side that needs my my cross pin retaining screw. So I'm going to take this, put it through this side spider gear first, work up to that one so it does line right up, which is good. Now I'm going to rotate this back this way, holding that there. I'm going to take my other thrust washer, get it installed. Sometimes thrust washers don't go in this easy, and it takes a lot of work to get them in there, but when they're used, like this one is, they go in a little bit easier. So if you're reinstalling new spider gears, you're going to have to play with this for a little bit to get it to line up right. It can be a total pain in your neck. There we go. Rotate it back. Now here we have the marks. Rotate everything here so we can see it. Thrust washers are in. Rotate one axle. Everything's nice and smooth. All we have to do now is put the differential cover back on it, throw gear oil in there, put the tires back on, and she's down the road.